They came to my place on a Tuesday afternoon. No sirens. No badges flashing. No announcement. Just two men in dark suits walking through my front door like they owned it. Federal agents. I could smell it on them before they said a word, that particular mix of authority and desperation that only comes from people who've tried everything and failed. The taller one had gray at his temples. The other one carried a briefcase he never opened. They didn't ask to sit down. They just did. And that told me everything I needed to know. They weren't here to arrest me. They were here because they needed me. Mr. Johnson, the gray-haired one said, we have a situation that requires a specific kind of expertise. I didn't respond. I just watched them. Watched the way the younger one's eyes moved around the room, cataloging exits, looking for threats. Watched how the older one kept his hands visible, palms down on his knees. These were trained men trying very hard to look unthreatening. That's when you know you have leverage. When federal agents walk into your home and try to make you comfortable. We're aware of your operations in Harlem, he continued. We're also aware that you maintain a certain order. A structure. That's valuable to us. What's valuable to you? I asked. Stability, he said. Predictability. Intelligence. I leaned back in my chair. You have a whole agency for intelligence. Why do you need mine? The younger one shifted. The older one smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Because our intelligence doesn't work in Harlem, he said. And we need it to. That's when I understood. The FBI had a problem they couldn't solve with badges and warrants. They had a problem that required someone who understood the streets better than any federal manual ever could. They had a mafia problem. And it was bigger than they wanted to admit. Let me explain something about power in 1960s New York. The mafia had grown beyond simple organized crime. They weren't just running numbers and protection rackets anymore. They were in the unions, the construction industry, the docks, the garbage collection. They had judges on payroll. They had politicians in their pocket. They had built an infrastructure so deep into the legitimate economy that pulling them out would collapse entire industries. The FBI knew this. They'd been trying to break the mafia for years. Wiretaps. Surveillance. Turning low-level guys. Nothing worked. Because the mafia understood something fundamental, you can't infiltrate a family business. You can't turn someone whose loyalty is reinforced by blood, marriage, and the genuine fear that betrayal means death. But Harlem was different. Harlem was territory the mafia wanted but couldn't fully control. And that's where I came in. See, the FBI couldn't touch the mafia's core operations. Too many lawyers, too many legitimate fronts, too many politicians protecting their interests. But they could pressure the mafia's expansion. They could make it expensive, risky, and complicated for the Italians to move into new territories. And the easiest way to do that was to make sure those territories remained occupied by someone they could work with. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. The older agent glanced at his partner, then back at me. We're proposing that certain activities in Harlem continue without federal interference. In exchange for information about activities outside Harlem that threaten national security. National security. That's how they justified it to themselves. That's how they'd justify it to their superiors if it ever came to light. The mafia was spreading into Cuba, into labor unions, into areas that could genuinely threaten American interests. And if it took tolerating one black kingpin in Harlem to contain them, well, that was a price worth paying. What kind of information? I asked. Movement of goods. Meetings between families. Plans for expansion. Names of corrupt officials. Anything that helps us understand the larger picture. You want me to be an informant. We want you to be a partner, he corrected. Informants get paid and discarded. Partners maintain their operations and their territory. There's a significant difference. There was. But there was also a significant risk. Being an informant gets you killed. But being a federal partner gets you something worse, it gets you isolated. The moment word gets out that you're working with the government, even tangentially, you lose the one thing that keeps you alive in this world, trust. The streets don't forgive collaboration. Ever. For any reason. But I also understood something these agents were counting on me understanding. The Mafia was coming for Harlem whether I cooperated or not. They wanted the drug trade. They wanted the numbers rackets. They wanted the real estate that was about to explode in value as Harlem started gentrifying. My choice wasn't between collaboration and independence. My choice was between collaboration and extinction. What guarantees do I have? I asked. No paperwork, the older agent said immediately. No records. No written agreements. This conversation never happened. You're not an asset. You're not in any database. If anyone ever asks us about you, our official position is that you're a subject of ongoing investigation. And unofficially, certain arrests won't happen in Harlem. Certain raids will have advance warning. Certain federal resources will look the other way while you maintain order. As long as you maintain order. That last part was the key. As long as I kept Harlem stable, predictable, and under control, the FBI wouldn't touch me. But the moment things got messy, the moment violence spilled over, the moment I became more of a problem than a solution, that protection would evaporate. I was being offered a leash disguised as freedom. I need time to think, I said. You have 24 hours, the older agent replied. After that, we move forward with other options. And those options won't be as mutually beneficial. They stood up. Walked to the door. The younger one paused, looked back at me. For what it's worth, he said, we're not asking you to betray your people. We're asking you to protect them. From something bigger than all of us. Then they left. I sat there for a long time after they were gone. Thinking. Calculating. Running scenarios. The truth was, I didn't need 24 hours. I'd made my decision the moment they walked in. Because I understood something they probably didn't even realize. This wasn't their idea. This was inevitable. Power always finds its equilibrium. The FBI couldn't destroy the Mafia, so they needed to contain it. I couldn't fight the Mafia and the FBI simultaneously, so I needed to align with one to survive the other. And the Mafia, for all their strength, had one fatal weakness: they were predictable. They operated on systems, hierarchies, traditions. I operated on adaptation. The next day, I sent word through an intermediary. Simple message. We have an understanding. No meeting. No handshake. No ceremony. Just an acknowledgement that a line had been crossed that could never be uncrossed. And that's how it started. The alliance that wasn't supposed to exist. Here's how it worked in practice. The FBI would let me know when they were planning operations near Harlem. I'd make sure my people weren't anywhere near those operations. In exchange, I'd provide information about Mafia movements. Not detailed intelligence, but directional guidance. If a major deal was happening, I'd let them know the general area and timeframe. If a family was making moves into new territory, I'd confirm it. I never gave up names directly. Never wore a wire. Never testified. That was the line I wouldn't cross. But I didn't need to. The FBI had enough resources to act on general intelligence. They just needed someone to tell them where to look. And in return, Harlem became a federal blind spot. Raids that were planned got mysteriously cancelled. Investigations that were building momentum suddenly lost steam. Local police, who took their cues from federal priorities, backed off. I wasn't untouchable. But I was protected. And in my world, that's the same thing. The Mafia started feeling pressure without understanding why. Shipments they thought were secure got intercepted. Meeting places they'd used for years suddenly had federal surveillance. Associates who should have been safe got arrested on unrelated charges right before major operations. They suspected leaks. They suspected informants. They tore through their own organizations looking for traitors. But they never looked at me. Because why would they? I wasn't Italian. I wasn't family. I was an outsider they were trying to contain, not a partner they'd trust with sensitive information. That was my advantage. I was adjacent to their operations, close enough to observe, but never close enough to be suspect. But there were costs. Significant ones. The first cost was paranoia. When you're working both sides, even loosely, you start seeing threats everywhere. Every conversation becomes a calculation. Every relationship becomes a risk. You can't afford friends anymore. You can't afford trust. The second cost was moral. I'm not going to pretend I was a good man. I was a criminal. But there's a code in this world, and part of that code is you don't cooperate with law enforcement. Ever. Doesn't matter the reason. Doesn't matter the justification. You just don't. I'd crossed that line. And even though I'd done it to protect Harlem, to maintain stability, to prevent something worse, I'd still crossed it. That stays with you. That changes how you see yourself. The third cost was isolation. The people closest to me couldn't know. Not because I didn't trust them, but because knowledge is liability. If they knew about the arrangement and got arrested, they could be leveraged. If they knew and talked, even accidentally, it would destroy everything. So I carried it alone. The weight of every decision, every piece of information passed along, every arrest that happened because I'd pointed the FBI in the right direction. I told myself it was strategy. I told myself it was survival. I told myself it was necessary. And it was. But that doesn't mean it didn't cost me. There were nights I'd sit in my apartment, lights off, looking out at Harlem. Watching the streets I'd spent my entire life protecting. And I'd wonder if I was still protecting them, or if I'd become something else. A tool. A mechanism. A piece in a game so much larger than myself that my intentions didn't even matter anymore. The FBI used me to contain the Mafia. But who was containing me? The arrangement lasted years. Longer than either side probably expected. And it worked. The Mafia's expansion into Harlem slowed significantly. They still had operations there, still made money, but they never achieved the dominance they wanted. Federal pressure kept them cautious, and that caution kept them limited. And I remained. Not untouched, but unbroken. Not innocent, but effective. Not free, but functional. That's the reality of power at that level. You're never fully independent. You're always balancing between forces larger than yourself. The question isn't whether you're going to compromise. The question is which compromises you can live with. I chose to compromise with the FBI because the alternative was compromising with annihilation. And I'd built too much, protected too many people, survived too much to let it all collapse because of pride. Some people would call that selling out. Some people would call it survival. I call it reality. Here's what I learned from that whole experience. What I need you to understand. Law and crime aren't opposites. They're participants in the same system. They need each other. Law needs crime to justify its existence, its budgets, its authority. And crime needs law to create the scarcity, the prohibition, the black markets that make crime profitable. We were all playing the same game. The FBI, the Mafia, me. We just had different uniforms. The FBI liked to think they were righteous. The Mafia liked to think they were honorable. I knew better. We were all just trying to control territory, maintain power, and survive in a world that was constantly trying to destroy us. The only difference was honesty. I never pretended to be something I wasn't. I was a criminal. I ran illegal operations. I used violence when necessary. I didn't wrap it in patriotism or tradition or family values. I just did what needed to be done and lived with the consequences. That's more honest than most people in power can claim. The alliance eventually ended. Not dramatically. Not with betrayal or exposure. It just faded. I got older. The FBI agents I'd worked with retired or moved on. New people came in who didn't understand the arrangement or didn't want to honor it. The Mafia evolved. Harlem changed. The whole landscape shifted. And when it did, I stepped back. Not because I was forced to. But because I'd accomplished what I needed to accomplish. I'd protected my territory long enough for it to transform into something the Mafia couldn't simply take. I'd built infrastructure, relationships, political connections that would survive without me. That's the real victory. Not staying on top forever. But building something that endures after you're gone. Looking back now, I don't regret the alliance. I don't apologize for it. It was a strategic decision made by a man trying to survive in an impossible situation. And it worked. Harlem survived. I survived. The people I was trying to protect mostly survived. That's all you can ask for in this world. But I'll tell you this. The thing that keeps me up sometimes, even now, isn't guilt. It's the question of who really won. Did I use the FBI? Or did they use me? Did I protect Harlem? Or did I help the federal government contain it? Was I a strategist? Or was I just another tool in someone else's strategy? I don't have answers to those questions. Maybe there aren't any. Maybe at that level of power, the distinction doesn't matter. Maybe when you're operating in that gray space between law and crime, between survival and betrayal, between protection and control, the only thing that matters is that you're still standing when it's over. And I was. That's not a boast. It's just a fact. The FBI's forbidden alliance with Bumpy Johnson wasn't about justice. It wasn't about crime fighting. It wasn't even really about the Mafia. It was about two powers recognizing that they needed each other. And being pragmatic enough to make it work. That's the real lesson. Not good versus evil. Not law versus crime. But power recognizing power. And choosing accommodation over destruction. Because in the end, power doesn't want to destroy itself. It wants to perpetuate. And sometimes, the best way to perpetuate is to make deals with people you're supposed to be fighting. That's not corruption. That's not betrayal. That's just how the world actually works when you're honest enough to see it clearly. And I always saw it clearly. That's why they came to me. That's why the alliance worked. And that's why, years later, I can tell you this story without shame or pride. Just truth. Raw, complicated, uncomfortable truth. The kind of truth that doesn't fit in headlines or movies or simple narratives about heroes and villains. The kind of truth that only exists in the spaces between. And I lived in those spaces my entire life.